Welcome to In China with Michelle Zhou. Manufacturers have long known China to be a leader in their industry, but now the world is recognizing China as a business center for companies, market traders, education, and artists. It's no wonder that the economy has grown to be the world's second largest. In our program, you'll learn from the thought leaders and professionals who have lived in both the U.S. and China and continue to do business there. Now, here is your host, Michelle Zhou.
Welcome to In China with Michelle Zhou. I'm your host, Michelle. I'm the founder and the CEO of Pacific Technologies Consulting Group. We help American and Chinese organizations learn from each other, bridge their needs, and grow their businesses internationally. You can contact me at our company website, ptcgconsulting.com, and I always welcome you to connect me on LinkedIn. Today, I invited Mr. Rami Blachman to the show. He's the founder of China Israel Innovation Accelerator, CIIA, and he's a tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist based in Shanghai, China, and Tel Aviv, Israel. We would like to talk about the secret sauce for foreign startups succeed in China. Welcome to the show, Rami.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
So where are you video conferencing in today?
I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And many people know Israel to be the startup nation, which is a place that breeds, I think, thousands of startups that many of them go on to be successful in Silicon Valley. And we see some of the leading unicorns coming out of Israel. So that's been a success story in Israel for over 25 years now.
Yes, I would love to hear a lot of information and insights from you. First, before we jump into that, I want to just check in with you. How are things there with the pandemic?
Unfortunately, Israel started out on the right footing. So at around May, after 6 weeks of lockdown, they opened up the country and things were going very well. But then things began going in the wrong direction. So right now, in terms of the number of people infected, we're almost as bad as the US, unfortunately. So
Wow.
We have become what's called a red state now, and things are really pretty much out of control. So unfortunately, the situation is not so good, but we remain hopeful.
I think maybe it will be really helpful for you to first introduce yourself to our audience, and especially your connection with China. And I mentioned the Startup Accelerator. What is it? Can you please give us a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. In fact, I think my relationship with China is not coincidental. I was raised in Taipei, Taiwan. That's where I spent many formative years of my youth. And so I think being in China is not a coincidence. So it's something that I felt, the Chinese culture was a part of me in many, many ways. So in my background, I am as you mentioned, technology entrepreneur and venture capitalist. I've been working and living in China for over 12 years. In my past, I've started ventures and I've worked for Giza Venture Capital, which is one of the leading VC firms based in Israel. And I've spent a lot of time, particularly in Hangzhou and Shanghai. These are two cities that I've spent, a number of years, but have gone around a lot. And essentially what the focus of my work in China has been to work with various Chinese cities. So in addition to Shanghai and Hangzhou, I've worked with the city of Xi'an, Nanjing, Haikou, Hainan province, and with business and investment groups looking into technology companies, particularly out of Israel. So essentially looking into Israeli startups in various sectors, in various stages in their development, and looking into mostly commercializing these startups in the Chinese market. That's been the focus of my work. Now, as I've mentioned in my introduction, Israeli technology companies have been very successful going to Silicon Valley and setting up their main office there. And the model that has developed over the last 25 years is that they set up the R&D center in Israel and their main operations, the management, the sales, and the marketing in the US. Mm-hmm. And that's worked very well for both sides. However, when looking into China, things are very different. There is, these days, particularly in the past 3 or 4 years, there are very clear opportunities in China. It's a market where these companies can grow quickly and can reach high valuations, but there are very big challenges there, for foreign founders.
Right. We will go into that and learn from you, because you've been in China for so many years and you are doing this. And we will see what model you have figured out that works for China and compared it with the US. One thing I want to mention is Israel has this reputation, just like you said, right? A lot of technology companies started from Israel, and then at some time, they go to US. When you mentioned that, immediately I remember my previous neighbor. I live in the Seattle area, and Microsoft is here, Amazon is here. So my neighbor, his family, they moved from Israel to Seattle because their company was sold to Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And before they sold their company to Microsoft, they told me the first company they sold to Google. So their family moved to Silicon Valley, stayed there for a couple of years because of this acquisition. And then after that, they went back, right? The husband is the guy started all this tech stuff. They went back and started another tech company and sold to Microsoft. So they moved to Seattle. And after a couple of years, as my neighbor, I know this husband because we were colleagues in Microsoft and we chat a lot. When he was working for Microsoft, he started another one. Okay. Some ideas in the US. Yeah. Then finally he went back, the whole family moved back and they started another one. So I don't know when is the next time they move back to the US again. But you see it's continuously, it's always innovation, always new ideas. And they ended up pretty well. So that's happened to my neighbor. I saw this model. I don't know how they made it in such a success, but you know it. So I would love to hear about it from you.
Yes, there are many explanations. I mean, people look at the phenomena that is Israel, and they try to explain how it became such a startup nation and what's the source of innovation, what drives people to be tech entrepreneurs, and there are different reasons for that. But the fact remains that it's a very unique place in terms of people, the culture cultivates and encourages young people, but not only young people, people of all ages, to go out and create a new startup. And the fact that there's such strong relationship, that it's really a microcosm of Silicon Valley, and that there's so many success stories, and that there's so much collective experience that pushes people to do that. And I think that's the source of the success.
Mm-hmm. If you summarize the formula for Israeli startups, what are some key things? You mentioned the source of innovation. And what are other things that you think really contributed to this success in the US?
Well, first of all, many people come out of the military, the Israeli military. So everybody goes to the military for 2 to 3 years. It's mandatory. And some of the units, like 8200, 8200, there's some leading units in the Israeli military that produce many of these successful entrepreneurs, and many of them are known already in the United States. So the fact that there's so many people with this kind of experience, people who are founders, people who are, product managers, VP R&D, all of these people that have been trained already in the US, in Silicon Valley, and have gone back. And the fact that you have an ecosystem of so many VC firms and thousands of these startups that keep hatching, all of this together, contribute to this formula of success. So that when a new, entrepreneur, be it a serial entrepreneur like your neighbors or people that start their journey, they pretty much have a level playing field. So the path forward is transparent. It doesn't mean that they will necessarily be successful. They could succeed or fail, but they know what the rules of the game are.
So what I heard is, besides the source of innovation, you mentioned it's the network, right? The people, they know each other, and then they help each other. And then these people build a ecosystem, from investment to the teachers teach the successful entrepreneurs to teach other people what you should do in order to be successful. And then they connect to the right investors, to the right market, to all these the conditions, and they help to foster the new entrepreneurs get into this journey. So they help each other.
Yeah, the thing is that Israel has become a microcosm of Silicon Valley, very, very closely intertwined. And exactly as you say, it's anywhere from all the links in the food chain. So investment, the network, the operations, the talent, everything, the best practices, the way you handle yourself, being a professional in tech. What does that mean? So all of these things come together, and that's, I think, the source and the reason for the success.
You also mentioned this is soft skills. Yeah, it's not
Many
just you have
skills.
The technology. Yeah. I'm curious about the education in Israel, because my neighbor, they moved back. One of the major reasons was because their daughter, she became, I think she was in high school, and she was pretty successful in school. They have 3 kids. They had a good life here. Then the parents told me, well, the major reason is they want their daughter get the real education back in Israel. So they moved. I don't know what this means, right? Can you tell me a little bit about what's unique about this education in Israel? So people become entrepreneurs. They can innovate. They create all these great things.
Yes, I think this doesn't necessarily speak to entrepreneurialism and innovation. I think what you meant maybe partly is the very strong link that there is between Israelis and Jewish people in general in Israel. So for many Israeli people, it's very important that their children have a very strong connection to Israel and that they don't lose that connection. Maybe some people from China also have it. They live in the US, but they want their children to remember the homeland. In Israel, it's sometimes more accentuated. It's more, it's a more important component in in people's consciousness because of history, because of many things that happen. The very unique Jewish history and Israeli history. People have a very strong connection to the country, and so these parents, when they live abroad many years, they feel that their children become maybe a little bit estranged, or they don't have that strong feeling anymore. So they want them to come back, and have that very unique feeling. I don't know if that answers your question. That doesn't speak directly to innovation and technology and startups. I think that's what she meant when she said education.
I think it totally makes sense to me. They moved back for their kids, but in the meantime, they continue to go back and build their new company.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about China. So before we go into the startups, Israel startups in China, what's the formula there? I want to first come back to the writings, the articles you have been writing about China, because I know you are a writer. You have published articles in many different places, and you observed what's going on in China in the technology and startup space. Can you tell us a little bit about the trends or the key things you have observed and you've been writing about?
Yeah, so I think what's been happening in China in the past, I would say 3 to 4 years, is dramatic. I remember, 5, 6, 7 years ago or more coming to China first. And when I mentioned, when I said the word startup, people didn't know what I was talking about.
Mm.
Startup, what is that? And that changed dramatically. I think more or less around 2017, 2016, 2017, something dramatic happened. And all of a sudden, when you are in China, especially in the major hubs, Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, Nanjing, but also the second and third tier cities, more second and third tier cities, you see just a huge explosion of people thinking about technology. Everybody is a startup entrepreneur. So many people are thinking about it. And VC has become huge. In 2018, I think China's investment into startups, venture capital investment, reached $100 billion or so, the equivalent, which is as much or more than the US. And that's amazing to think about, because just a few years before that, it was very small. It was a small fraction of that. And within a very short time frame, it caught up. So, it's really an incredible situation. That's the sort of the good news. I think at the same time, the fact that it went up so quickly also caused some problems, because the market was not fully developed and mature. Mm-hmm. So in the heyday of 2017 and 2018, when the numbers were rising and venture capital investment was just pouring into these new startups, you were seeing a lot of inadequate, let's say, investment. So into companies that were not, that shouldn't have been there. That that was just throwing money at startups that have no future. And that was happening a lot. And I think that's typical of a market that's, not at a mature phase yet. So we saw that happening. So many of these companies that were funded in 2018 just had no future. It was clear that this was just these investors operating out of fear of missing out. It's called FOMO. They didn't want to miss out on the action. So anyone that came with a presentation and a good story, boom, they gave them money.
One thing I noticed in China, the VC side, a lot of times people chase after those hot topics, or, for example, blockchain was hot for a while, right? VR, AR was hot for a while. Exactly. Then after that 1 or 2 years, boom, it's cold. The VCs will not invest into this anymore. So that also created a phenomenon, as you described. Companies, they
a bubble.
Together PowerPoint, then they go after those keywords. Yeah. Hot topics.
Exactly. So you mentioned some of these buzzwords, such as blockchain, AR, VR, and these were, these were technologies that were not yet mature also, so they're problematic. And so you saw a lot of this money chasing these startups that were not really, had no feasibility, were not viable in any way. And that caused what's called then the capital winter. So around late 2018, 2019, all of a sudden it came to a stop, because many of these investments were not going anywhere. And then there was, sort of like a crash in a way, where a lot of that money froze. So there was no more money, or much less money flowing into startups, as low as 30 or 40%, I think, of the previous quarters. And it caused a reshuffle also in the industry. So all of a sudden, VCs were becoming more professional. Before that, in 2018, basically anyone almost off the street who dressed up nicely and talked the right language could get money from LPs, from limited partners, to manage a fund. But they knew nothing about technology. They knew nothing about tech investing. and that came to an end. So it was painful to many VCs and to many startups, but it was a healthy development for the market, becoming more mature and more rational. And so it's been picking up, I think, for towards the end of 2019, and then coronavirus, everything changed. So the dynamics are different. But if I follow the numbers, I think in 2020, after a hiatus, after a stop, January, February, part of March, I think now VC investing is picking up again. And it's quite clear that, things in China are happening very fast. So they are learning quickly, and the market is maturing, I think, at a fast rate at this point.
Yes. You just mentioned the changes in the recent years. There's a lot of changes. And in the tech industry, I know there are many different technologies, new things happening. From what you observed today, what are some major things that you think is on the top tier for investors, for Chinese investors or VCs looking at, that they think those are good opportunities?
So we can look at it vertically and horizontally. Horizontally, AI is queen, artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's the keyword today, the buzzword.
Buzzword. Everybody loves it. I think particularly in China, people are enamored with these buzzwords. So if you're an AI company, I think still today, but very much so in 2018, 2019, if you position yourself as an AI company, you're going to get a lot of that attention from investors and from the market. The question is, what does it mean to be an AI company if you have machine learning? To what extent you have the expertise? Because many of the solutions that these startups provide can be done without AI just as well, the actual software solution. But investors look for the deep tech story, because the deep tech story gives them the potential, the valuation. They're looking for a very high valuation. And when you have a deep tech story, it enables that. So AI, I think, still reigns supreme in China. I'm sure that investors at this point are asking more questions. So it's not enough to say we are such and such AI company. They're going to ask questions to find out, what kind of R&D force you have, what kind of experts you have, what kind of data scientists. So they're not going to just take it, as is, that you're an AI company. But still, if you have a real capability and you have the talent, then that's a huge advantage. Still, horizontally, I think blockchain is a misused, almost abused term, because people throw that around very, very easily. However, there's very little or not so much actual capabilities. Not many companies out there really using blockchain technologies to build solutions that are practical, that solve real life problems out there. That, I think, that's still in the making. But something really interesting happened in October. President Xi Jinping made a big announcement that October of 2019, that blockchain was a strategic priority for China. And at that point, everybody picked up the signal, and many have, taken it forward. And we see that particularly in Hainan, which wants to be a kind of a hub for blockchain. So blockchain is another horizontal. If we look at the verticals, so these are the sectors, there are many sectors in China that, if you look at technology, where China is very key market. Basically, every vertical that you look at, from smart mobility, autonomous driving, robotics, edge device, edge computing, which is IoT in many cases, Internet of Things, smart industrial IoT. Then you move on forward to the worlds of e-commerce. E-commerce is huge. China is by far the biggest e-commerce market. I haven't seen figures for 2020, but it must be around, it was $1.5 trillion in 2019 versus $500 billion e-commerce in the US, so 3 times as much. So e-commerce, digital marketing, consumerism, very, very, very big in China. And of course, if you look at agro-tech and food tech, clean tech, all of that, water treatment, agricultural technology, which is super interesting these days, food technologies, all of that they're very, very big sectors in China.
Wow, great. So looks like the field is very wide, broad, and there are many things technologies company can go and play in. I think it's time to take a quick break now. And when we come back, I would love to learn more about the China Accelerator that you have in China. You started there, why you started, what it is for, and then how you help the Israeli companies, the startups come to China, become a successful company there. And that also applies to other countries, the foreign companies to come to China.
Yes.
All right, we will be back right away.
Are you interested in expanding your business to China, but don't know how to start? Are you wondering how to grow your sales in the China market and win over competition? Meet Michelle Zhou and her team at Pacific Technologies Consulting Group. Our consultants are U.S.-China experts and have all lived and worked in both the U.S. and China, with many years' experience in market entry strategies, management, and execution. We can help you find the right partners, develop opportunities, and grow your business in China. Please visit ptcgconsulting.com today.
Welcome back. So before the break, we talked about general how Israel companies went to US, become successful. And then we also talked about the trends in the technology space in China that, Rami, you have observed. Now, I would like to take this back and really looking into the China Israel Innovation Accelerator, CIIA, that you have founded in China. What is this? And why did you start this CIIA?
About 2 years ago, well, that's something that goes back even further. It was clear that China, as I said earlier, is becoming a playing field for startups. Up until then, there was only one place where a startup could really, get funded and grow quickly, become a unicorn, and be acquired by Google or Microsoft or Amazon, or go, have an IPO, go public and on NASDAQ. So that could only happen in the US forever, basically. So if you were a startup anywhere in the world, that was the place to go if you wanted to make it big. And now, all of a sudden, there's another playing field, and that's China. However, there are problems there for foreign entrepreneurs, for foreign startup founders. The culture and the rules and everything else is very, very different. And it's not as transparent. It's not even very transparent to the Chinese entrepreneurs many times, but they know how to operate. However, if a foreign tech entrepreneur wants to enter the Chinese market and commercialize their technology, how do they do that? There are no success stories. There's no track record of anyone doing something. So I basically set out to try to solve this problem. And it's a big problem, I think. And so I created the China Israel Innovation Accelerator, CIIA, which, because we are pioneers, I think, in what we're doing, and being a pioneer has good sides and bad sides, as everything in life. But we wanted to think about a framework that would help some of these startups that have solutions and have technologies and have products that are viable in the Chinese market, that we recognize them to be that, to have that viability, for them to be able to land in China or begin to land in China and launch their solution commercially there. Now, it's not an accelerator as you think, for example, about Techstars or Y Combinator. These accelerators, they have cohorts 3 or 4 times a year, and they have 10 or 15 or 6 companies coming into a very, well set program. where they come in for 3 months and they go through, the program for 3 months. We're not there yet. It's more of a kind of a fluid framework. So some of the things that we've been doing so far, for example, last year in Nanjing Tech Week in June of 2019. Nanjing Tech Week is a whole week of innovation and technology events in the city of Nanjing, which is a very, very important city in China, but many people in the West, they don't know too much about it. If they did learn some history, they know. But it's a very important city in China, and it's a city that has ambitions to become a leader and a hub in technology. They don't want to fall behind Shanghai and Beijing and the first-tier cities. So that was a week of matchmaking. And we brought a delegation of Israeli startups and incubators, companies like Mellanox, which is a very big data center switching, hardware company based out of Israel. It's not so much a startup; it's a very large company, but also smaller companies or startup companies such as TEMI, TEMI, which is a robotics company that was funded to the tune of $50 million by Chinese investors. Another company is Innoviz in the smart mobility and autonomous driving. They have a LiDAR solution for autonomous vehicles, and a number of other companies. They all came to Nanjing, and they attended a week of matchmaking with multinationals such as Ford Motor Company, such as Siemens, the German, Siemens Bosch, and with Tencent and Alibaba, and other Chinese companies, with local city officials, and went into sessions and also business face-to-face and so on, and keynote speaking opportunities. So that was a first step, in a vision that says, okay, Nanjing is a launch pad for these companies in these particular sectors. Let's get these companies to the city and put them in a position where they're landing and ready to launch into the Chinese market.
So question here, you are not matching them with investors. You are matching them with potential customers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or partners?
I think, yes, that's a very, very important point that I've come to realize that, there have been cases many times where foreign tech companies, startups are looking for Chinese investors because there's a lot of money in China, right? So they think, let's go raise money there. In my experience, that hasn't worked very well for various reasons. So I've come to the conclusion that the best method for foreign startups, the first steps that they should do should focus on the product and the market and commercialization. So these should be companies that have already raised funding in their home market. Many countries don't have a VC ecosystem. Luckily, Israel does have one. So the companies that we bring into the program all have raised some money, anywhere from seed round, let's say $2 to $3 million, or more than that, of course. Some of them are A rounds, so they raise 5, 10, 50, 100, that's fine. But all of them have raised some money. And now they're ready to look into the Chinese market in a very serious way. And that's where we can help them. And then later, we can, we think about that. They could raise financing from Chinese investors for the local Chinese subsidiary, but that's a different story. But you're right. You've touched on an important point there.
So you pick not the early stage startups. You pick somebody who has products, who has a business model, who can come here to launch and commercialize. So that's the goal for those companies. Okay.
Yes, but when we say that they are early stage, some of the seed round is definitely early stage.
Okay.
Now the rounds are bigger these days. The fundraising rounds are bigger. So seed round used to be $500,000 to $1 million. These days in Silicon Valley, seed round is $2 to $3 million. So these companies, they're definitely considered, they can be early stage, but they are not, pre-seed. So if you're just a few people, a couple of founders with a PowerPoint and an idea, and you don't even have a product yet, and you need your first $300,000 or $400,000, you're too early for the Chinese market, in our, according to our understanding.
Okay. So that's the kind of things you have done in the past, right? You said that's 2019. And
Yes.
when you look at from what you have learned through doing this, helping the Israeli companies come to China, commercialize and become more successful, what's the plan for the future in terms of this type of helping them accelerate?
Yeah, so we've realized, like I think many other people, that there are many events, many conferences, and you see some of these foreign innovators and digital innovators and entrepreneurs coming to China, and they have a wonderful time, and they are super impressed with what they see, and many nice things are said to each other, but there's no follow-up. There are no results. And many times the cities or the people who are organizing these events, they, throw a lot of money at it, and there's big splash. And during the event, everyone feels elevated, but there are no results after that. So we were looking at this problem. And in fact, before coronavirus broke out, we had some plans on actually having a longer term plan for this. So not just have an event, but have actual follow-up. And also, we still have it. These things have slowed down due to coronavirus, but we have in the plans to set up an accelerator. So an actual accelerator, a landing pad, a launch pad in the city of Nanjing, for example, where we were planning in March of 2019 to have a China Israel AI Summit, where we would invite to some of these really interesting founders of some of these really, cutting edge startups, as well as some venture capital people and just people who have a very interesting story and a view on China and Israel and in general, technology in China and foreign technology. And after that, 2 months later, in May and June, we were supposed to have a tighter matchmaking event with lessons that we learned from the previous year. And then also inaugurate an accelerator. So this accelerator would have the program that would help these startups land and match them as fast as possible with their potential customers in China, which is their most important goal. It would help them localize the technology. Very, very key task. So if you have a solution that is right for the US market, let's say, or for Western markets, in China, it needs to be adapted and customized for China.
Yes.
Has to be that. So that's one example. You have to have local people. So a foreigner cannot sell in China. Doesn't work that way. Cannot happen. You need a few key people. You need to register a company. That's very important. Where do you register it? And you want to get the right policy. And you want to be closely linked with the city that you're in, maybe the district. So all of these things, this program that we have in the planning was supposed to happen, but everything is delayed these days for obvious reasons.
I think you mentioned the government role here. The event you mentioned, the government was one of the key organizers to put together this event. And different cities have different policies in terms of investment as well as in terms of the supporting they provide to the companies for them to be successful landing there and launch there. So I think since you have been in China for so many years and you have been looking into different cities, maybe from this side, give our audience, especially our startup entrepreneurs, some ideas about in China, how this works, what's the role of those cities for the companies if they want to come to China, the startups if they want to land in China?
Yeah, so if we want to have some, lessons learned from all of this for foreign entrepreneurs, they could be, US found Americans, they could be Europeans, they could be Asians, of course, Israelis. They look into China, and I've written about this. One of the ways to look at it is on a city-by-city basis. What do the cities offer? But that gets a little tricky because, obviously people want to go to Shanghai and Shenzhen or Beijing, of course. These are the cities that are more kind of welcoming, I think, to foreigners. Shanghai is probably the most cosmopolitan city in China. And so it's a natural place for foreign entrepreneurs to say, okay, we're going to go to Shanghai. We're going to start there. But Shanghai doesn't embrace, the foreign entrepreneurs as much. It's kind of, everybody wants to go there, so they're not going out of their way to attract people. Competition is high. And you have to look at Shanghai being such a big city. There's Zhangjiang high-tech district.
Right.
You have, different districts have different policies. And in Shanghai, you also have different accelerator programs that you could go to. So there's XNode, for example, Shanghai XNode, a wonderful place to land for foreign founders who want to, find their way around in China. Another one is InnoSpace, Shanghai. So Shanghai, there's also a community of many foreigners. It's a very natural landing place, and you can meet people, and you can, learn and find your way around. However, there are other cities that you should look at. I think some of the second-tier cities, key second-tier cities, are very promising. I think Hangzhou, I don't need to, everybody who has been to China a little bit and knows something about China knows that Hangzhou is a wonderful city for technology. There must be at least 24 unicorns that have started there and that are based there. Of course, Alibaba. So Hangzhou is a really, really good city. Nanjing, great place to go. Xi'an. And I would also mention Hainan Island, which is considered the Hawaii of China by many people. Hainan is a really interesting story to it because Hainan is a free trade zone. There are a number of free trade zones in China, but that is one of the most liberal regulatory environments in Hainan, and it's also a free port. And about 2 years ago, I think it was April of 2018, President Xi Jinping again announced that Hainan is going to be the next great place in China in terms of free trade, free port, and so on, competing maybe with the new Shenzhen, let's say. So there are incredibly favorable and friendly policies there in Haikou. For foreign entrepreneurs, it's a very nice place to be also in many ways. It's, kind of a backwater. It's not Shanghai and it's not Beijing. They would love to see foreign innovators, digital nomads, these people landing, and there are many incubators and programs there. China is vast. I think if someone is looking to go to China, they have to keep in mind something very important. Very, very important. And that is that there is a learning curve. Mm-hmm. And the learning curve could be brutal. So you could spend years learning and learning and learning. And that is a problem, for a startup entrepreneur, because maybe their most important resource is time. They need to focus and get the job done quickly. They're not there to sort of go on a fishing expedition, on an to explore. So that is really, I think, one of the big obstacles standing in the way of foreign entrepreneurs right now when they look into China. And so what happens many times, also with Israeli startup entrepreneurs, is that they say China is great. We see it's amazing, it's growing, it's a superpower, it's a huge market, but it's not for us. Mm. It's inaccessible. We can't afford to waste a year and then see no results, which is very likely to happen. So they go on the, well-known track, which has worked really well for everybody. And they have also the venture capital funds that have put money into them, and they're breathing down their necks. They're saying, don't go into adventures now. We don't want you going and, looking for opportunity and trying new things, and searching for new models. Don't do that. we need to exit here in 3 or 4 years. So you go the path that everyone goes and you do what you need to do. So that's what we're up against here. That's why, programs and places and situations where these founders can land and they can meet their customers, match with their customers in the most efficient way, in the shortest, line that links two dots. Mm-hmm. That is the holy grail.
Mm. So your accelerator, the model or the dream you have is you help to build this road. You figure out the obstacles and what works, and you build this framework. So the startups from Israel, they can fit in and they will be handheld through this journey. So they have a higher opportunity to be successful in China. That's great.
Exactly. And I would say that, it's still, we call it a framework, but the next step is to have an actual accelerator on the ground, like I mentioned, that we have planned for Nanjing. Mm-hmm. And this would take it from being sort of like a framework to an actual program where we handpick the companies that are ready to do that we think are best suited for that. And then we have a program for them that's exactly, as you say, hand-holding and taking them step by step so that they can work the way startups work. They need to know that in a year, XYZ is going to happen, so that they're going to have this measurable results. They're going to have 2 customers. They're going to have, a team of 5 people on the ground, that they're going to have a company registered, that they're going to have a marketing effort, that they might raise money for the Chinese subsidiary X million of RMB. So with this accelerator program on the ground, this is something that we can achieve, and that can be really a game changer.
That's great. Now, Rami, we want to, at the very end, give our audience some very specific, useful tips, advice to help them. Yes. I have a couple of questions. My first question is thinking about the current situation, COVID-19 pandemic everywhere, and the world. China is the country that get it under control, and the rest of the world is still in this panic mode, right? We don't know what's going on or what will be the future. So given this current situation, now think back about the startups. If I am a startup founder, and where is the place I should go after for investment?
I would say that, in general, a startup should raise at least its initial funding, if it's early stage, pre-seed or seed, as much as possible in the closest ecosystem to it, in the closest market, because it's the most natural place. It's the place where people will know you, will understand your product. You'll have the best communications with them. So if you're, a company in Hong Kong or Singapore, go raise your money from local investors. If you're from Israel, you raise these initial funds locally, and that's everywhere. Later on, when the company grows a little bit and you have a product already that either is commercial or going commercial, then you can look at other markets. And of course, China, is very, very dominant these days. And at least in my opinion, following COVID-19, it will become more dominant, in many ways. It will play a greater role in the global, tech and VC system. So this is my advice to entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and China, on one side, it is a big market. China consumers have more money now. Second is, I think, a lot of if it's hardware, something tangible, it's manufactured in China. The ecosystem is there. So that's why China can be a good place to go. Now, my second question, thinking about startup founders they have in terms of if we are looking at China at this moment, what advice would you give foreign startups if they want to grow in China? Maybe they find bigger investment there, and maybe they want to land in China to really commercialize there. What are some advice you want to give them?
Yes. First of all, I would say there are a few things that I would advise them to do. Number one, I would say focus on the market. So have your product ready, have your solution ready, and look into the Chinese market and think how you can solve the problem that you're out to solve in China, in the Chinese market. What does it take to customize it to the Chinese market? Focus on that, on getting those first customers, POC, the proof of concept. I would say that raising money should be your second priority. That's not the thing you should focus on. We could go into that separately. That's a story in and of itself. But fundraising should be, I think, in my experience at least, a byproduct of commercialization. That would come when you're already there. You're going to capture the attention of some of these Chinese investors, and they're going to say, "Wow, look at these people," and they see that you're committed, right? So you're not just kind of a fly-by-night. You fly in, you said, "I need money." Why would they write you a check if the next day you're flying away? They don't know who you are, and you might just as well disappear. They want to see that you're committed. Chinese investors, their advantage is in the local market. They don't want to be just necessarily, most of them don't want to be just financial investors, looking for returns. They want to have a strategic value also in the local market. So if they see that you have a commitment, that's going to make them trust you and go with you. So that's one thing. Second thing that is maybe as important or even more, I would say, and that is to prioritize when you're in China. It sounds a little bit abstract, and it's true everywhere, right? We always need to prioritize anything we do in life. But just because as a foreigner in China, there is such a learning curve, as I was talking about before, very, steep learning curve. And you're a small company with limited resources, and you're going into this vast country and this vast market with many unknowns, many uncertainties. It's not as transparent as you're used to, in other places. And there are going to be many, I would call them honey traps. So people will treat you very nicely. They will host you nicely. You'll feel great. You will feel like you can win the riches of China quickly. But that is an illusion, because the road is very, very tough. And so to be able to manage through that, and that's much easier said than done, you need to prioritize. You need to look at the prospects that you have and focus your energies only on those that you think will bear fruit. And that is an acquired, skill. That's experience. And otherwise, you can end up sort of chasing ghosts. You keep flying and you keep going and you have meetings, and many times people in China, they're not going to say kind of, "No, forget it. We're not going to invest in your product," or "It's not a good fit," or they're going to say things that might mean yes or no, and you keep thinking that it's going to happen, and you keep spending time and energy. So this is one of the risks that people working in the US, they know the social cues, they know the body language. They when somebody says something, you know what it means. You can look them up also. You can search them on Google. In China, you see a company, a potential customer or investor, you don't know who they are. Even Chinese people, if they don't know who's behind them, they don't necessarily know what they are. So that's even much more so for foreigners. So I would say prioritize, get help, work with people who have experience, go to accelerators that work with foreigners, try to have some kind of a, hook that is a reality, is like a bridgehead into the market. Don't just go running into it, hoping that something good will happen and sort of, going after your gut feeling, because that could mislead you in many cases.
Yeah, the cultural differences and as well as the mindset difference, I think that's very important. It's different when you are doing things in China versus your home country. Mhm.
Right.
Those are great advice. I really appreciate you share with us about your insights. So if our audience, they have questions, because you have been doing this for a while. If some people have questions about the space that you mentioned, right, especially the traps or the steps, the process, or the things to watch out for when they want to come to China, commercialize in there, how can they find you so that they can potentially get some help? I'm not just saying Israel people. I'm thinking about
Anywhere.
people, from any foreign countries if they want to go to China, because it's a new a new world for them.
Yes, so I welcome people to get in touch. We can put my email address there if that helps. They can contact me through LinkedIn as well. And I welcome anyone who has a question, who just wants to brainstorm, who wants to, people who have experience in China, who don't. Very welcome to get in touch, and we can talk, and I'll share my experience.
Great. Thanks so much, Rami. Today, we have talked about the secret sauce for foreign startups succeed in China. And you can find out more about Rami Blachman via LinkedIn. His name is Rami, last name Blachman. You are listening to In China with Michelle Zhou. I look forward to talking to you next time.
Thank you for tuning into In China with Michelle Zhou. Please join us for another edition next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time and 4 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Business Channel. We'll talk again next week.